You might be wondering, where on earth is the Canon EOS R1 and what are the latest rumored specs or confirmed specs on this camera? Nikon just announced and released the Nikon Z9, their full-frame mirrorless flagship camera, a camera that's been in the works for many years. It's capable of 8K video up to 30 frames per second, and in a future firmware update, is going to be able to do 60 frames per second. It can do 10-bit 422, and it can record in Apple ProRes 422, again in a future firmware update. It's a powerful camera. 4K 120 frames per second, 120 frames per second stills at 11 megapixels, or 20 frames per second lossless RAW. It's a powerful camera. And then at the beginning of this year, in January, Sony announced the Alpha 1, a 50 megapixel full-frame mirrorless flagship camera for Sony that could shoot 30 frames per second. And of course, a year before that, Canon announced their full-frame, not mirrorless, but DSLR, the 1DX Mark III, and it was an impressive camera. It still is in terms of what it can do in terms of frame rates and throughput. You want to put in a fast CF Express card, hold down that shutter button, you can just do so, and with the right card, you won't have to stop shooting. But in terms of other specs, video specs, it's beginning to seem a little, well, dated. So where are we with the Canon EOS R1 in terms of specs? Well, a lot has leaked out over the past couple of years, and much of it is, well, quad pixel autofocus, perhaps, maybe, but global shutter, not so much. So what is the Canon EOS R1 supposed to have? Well, in terms of a processor and sensor, it's going to have an all-new sensor and all-new processor. The only question is, will it have one or two processors? In the past, 1 series cameras have had dual processors. But let's take a look at the sensor. The Canon EOS R5 right now has the highest resolution sensor of Canon's R system at 45 megapixels. According to Canon rumors, the Canon EOS R1 is going to have a megapixel count of higher than 45 megapixels. So 100 megapixels, 85 megapixels? No, I don't think so. I think that's definitely the realm of a high megapixel camera. A follow-up to the R5 that will be capable of around 100, 102, or somewhere around that in terms of megapixels. No, the R1 isn't going to be that high. But let's see. Let's take a look at what we have already. The Nikon Z9 can do 45 megapixels, the same as the R5. But the Sony Alpha 1 can do 50 megapixels. Now, in this competitive market, camera companies are always looking at one-upping the other. And what I think is going to happen here, we're going to see the Canon EOS R1 at 55 to 60 megapixels. 60 might be a bit of a push. I think maybe 55 is the sweet spot. But that's just my conjecture. It could be 50 as well, but it's definitely going to be more than 45 megapixels according to Canon rumors, and Craig is usually very good with this stuff. If you remember back to the Canon EOS R5, when that was rumored back in January the 27th last year, Craig put out a full list of specifications that the R5 was supposed to have, and he was bang on. So again, as far as megapixels go, definitely more than 45, somewhere between 50 and 60 megapixels, and I'm willing to bet on 55. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. And like the Canon EOS R3 and the Sony, it's going to have a backside illuminated sensor, and this really helps to be able to push a lot more information, get it off that sensor really quickly, because you can put in 2 processors or 3 or whatever it is, but if you're not getting that information off the sensor quick enough, well, then you start to run into problems like rolling shutter. And what the Nikon Z9 has shown us is that when you get that information off quick enough, you don't really have any problems with rolling shutter, and therefore no need for a global shutter. So at this point, I don't really think we're going to see a global shutter. That one seems to be, and actually in several of the last rumors talking about the R1 from Canon rumors, Craig has more or less kind of poo-pooed the idea of a global shutter. It's still there as a potential, but it's not looking very good. As far as video goes, this camera is obviously going to be able to do 8K video, 24, 25, and 30 frames per second. With the Nikon Z9 announcing they're going to be able to do 60 frames per second, makes me wonder what Canon's going to do here. Is Canon going to match the Nikon Z9 and deliver 60 frames per second? Are they going to do something completely ludicrous like offer 120 frames per second in 8K? Think about this for a minute here. This is definitely possible. Look what the Alpha 1 has done with 8K or 8.6K oversampled 8K. It's not shooting raw. You're getting a much lower bit rate to be able to record to those Type A cards. So it's certainly possible that Canon could deliver 8K at 120 frames per second. But what Canon would love to be able to do, like Nikon, is offer these in RAW and high bit rates. Currently, the Canon EOS R5 and the R3 in their highest video resolutions and bit rates push out data or push data to the card at 325 megabytes per second or 2,600 megabits per second. And that's a pretty significant bit rate. But again, if you want to move that up to 60 frames per second and you're going to do RAW, you're going to be doubling that to about 650 megabytes per second or 5,200 megabits per second. And of course, 8K at 120 frames per second. Wow. It's a mind-boggling amount of data. I was just watching the movie Matrix Revolution. I was just watching the latest Matrix movie, and you watch that on a 4K television, you watch it at a high bit rate, and it's just staggering how good it is, the color grading, the detail. And when you think in your mind that this is shot probably around 24, 25 frames per second, but every frame, all that data that's being processed, that's being sent, it's just truly, truly amazing. So what about dynamic range, ISO? Well, some of the rumors have come out and said it's going to have an ISO up to 1.6 million. This is the same rumor that said we were going to have 85 megapixels, and I don't really think that's going to be the case. I don't really put a lot of faith in that rumor, and it hasn't really aged well. We haven't heard any updates on it. So not a lot of details there. As far as dynamic range goes, it's going to bump up the dynamic range. And initial rumors indicated around 15 stops of dynamic range, but we don't know too much about that. But here's something that's really quite interesting. According to Petapixel, a source has told them that the Canon EOS R1, it's definitely real. They confirmed that it's a real camera, that it is in development, but it's not ready for production at this point. And what they're waiting for, and this is the interesting part, is they're waiting for feedback on the Canon EOS R3 to finalize what the R1 is going to be. And I thought that was rather interesting. Now, there's an awful lot of feedback on the Canon EOS R1, and they already took some of that feedback and put it in the R3 in terms of overheating and record limits. And I'd expect that to also transition to the R1, so we won't get any overheating, we won't get any record limits. Well, we got a record limit on the R3, but it was 6 hours, and really at that point, I mean, who's going to record continuously for 6 hours in any sort of professional work? It's just not going to happen. So no overheating, no record limits. It certainly makes sense. It's going to have that bigger body, probably a little bit bigger than the R3. We'll have to wait to see the final for when it's going to be. So it's still in development. So what does that mean in terms of when are we going to get it? Well, as far as announcement, that's most likely in... well, it's not 2022 yet. In a couple of days it will be. But we're looking at August, September, around that time frame for an announcement. Could come as early as July. But as far as when we'll be able to purchase it, probably October, November, or December of 2022. If you look at what Nikon's doing with the Z9, that's what I can expect from Canon. I'd expect an announcement probably later in the year, and it could go as late as October with shipping in December. I hope, if this is going to be a really amazing camera, I really hope that Canon does what they did with the R5. They started leaking stuff and teasing us as early as January. Remember, January the 27th is when we got a whole bunch of specifications on the R5, and it was very detailed, and it was bang on. A lot of people didn't believe it. I certainly got raked over the coals for reporting it, but then just over about a month later, Canon did their development announcement and pretty much confirmed a lot of it. And then for every 5 or 6 weeks after that, Canon at some sort of event, whether it was NAB 2021, the virtual, or some other announcement from Canon Australia, for example, they'd confirm certain things. They say, yep, definitely 8K, yep, definitely RAW, definitely autofocus, definitely IBIS in all modes. And I think the R1, I think what Canon is looking to do with the R1 is make this a truly remarkable camera. And here's a quote from Craig, from one of his sources. You're going to love this quote. "A jack of all trades, a master of none, except that it will be a master of everything." Now, that's a pretty bold statement. If this does come from somebody at Canon that's being leaked, it tells you something. Just reflect a minute. Remember the R5, how that was such a huge announcement. Forget the overheating for a minute there. All the capabilities of that camera compared to everything else in Canon's lineup previously. I mean, compared to the EOS R, which was just a mirrorless version of the 5D Mark IV, a camera that came out in 2016, 2015. The R5 was a huge leapfrog over the competitions in terms of capabilities. 8K video, 4K 120, a 45 megapixel sensor capable of 20 frames per second, great dynamic range. This was a huge leapfrog. With that bold statement, it leads me to believe that the R1 isn't going to be just a minor update over the R5 and the R3. It's going to be a huge leap. We're going to see improvements in dynamic range. We're going to see improvements in frames per second. We're going to see improvements in detail. And one thing about a camera that has a 45 megapixel or 50 or 55 megapixel sensor, that's great. To me, that's not a capability I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is detail. It's nice to have a 45 megapixel sensor. Look at some of the early phones that had 45 megapixel sensors. They were terrible. What we're looking for is high detail, something that we can crop in and still have an incredible amount of detail. I was out shooting with the 100 millimeter f2.8 in this summer, and it was amazing shooting at 45 megapixels, really close, shooting macro. The ability to punch in and still have a lot of detail really, really matters. So if Canon does put out a camera that's capable of 55 or 60 megapixels and can still shoot 30 frames per second and still capture a lot of detail, that's impressive. To be able to shoot 4K at 120 frames per second, as I said with the Nikon Z6, is great. We have it with the R5, but the footage is a little bit soft. In the R1, to be able to shoot at 4K at 120 with more detail, to me matters more than being able to shoot at 240 frames per second. And of course, Canon, please, are you listening? Let us record audio in slow motion. I know, I get it. And most of the times if you're shooting at 120 frames per second, the audio sounds really, really strange. But a lot of times what we're trying to do in video is we do special effects. We'll ramp up the speed. And we do want to have that audio in there. It's important to have that audio later. So when we get to full speed, it sounds normal. So please give us the audio in slow motion. But I'm getting kind of excited by this camera. It's sounding pretty amazing. And just from what we've seen with Sony, with the Alpha 1 and the power of that camera, and then of course Nikon announcing and releasing the Z9 and the power in that camera, I get a sense that Canon is not panicking here in that they're saying, okay, well, how can we beat the competition? How can we release our full-frame mirrorless flagship camera that's better than all the rest? To say that it's a master of everything, that's bold. To be a master of video, well, will they give us internal ND filters? That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? What else could they? Because then at a certain point, this will take away from their mirrorless or their cinema line if they put too much in there in terms of video. But to be a master of everything, well, it would have to offer 8K at 60 frames per second, have the detail, and if they really wanted to one-up, they could put in 120 frames per second at 8K. Again, could be a little softer, and they could drop the frame rate a little bit, or keep the same frame rate as 8K 60, but put in maybe instead of doing RAW, doing all I, for example, or even IPB. The options are there. But you might be wondering, Simon, what on earth is the price of this camera? What is it going to cost us? Well, it's not going to be cheap. My thoughts all along has been that they're going to offer it at $64.99, and with Nikon coming in with the Z9 at $54.99 or $5,500. That takes a little bit of the pressure off Canon really launching this at a high price. The Z9 is a very powerful camera. Canon could very well take the R1 and instead of listing it at $64.99, go $69.99. Here's what we know. It's definitely going to be less than $10,000, and I can't see them putting it at $10,000 or even $8,000 and having it compete against the Alpha 1 and the Z9. It's going to put it at a different plateau. But if they can keep the price at $64.99 or pull a Nikon and make it a little cheaper, it's just going to fly off the shelves. It's going to have a lot of people that have the Alpha 1 go, do I really want to keep this camera? Because see, if you can shoot video at 8K at 30 frames per second RAW without any overheating in high detail, without any overheating, even the Alpha 1, after about an hour, half an hour, depending on what frame rate you're recording in, will overheat. And the Z9, well, we don't really know yet. We haven't run that camera through its paces yet. But the R1, with the right features and with the right price, will take off. Now, some of you are thinking, Simon, there's no way this camera is going to cost $64.99. Do you remember the discussion we had about the R5? I said there's no way this thing's going to cost $8,000, $7,000, or even $6,500. And I said, it's more or less going to follow inflation and be around $4,000, maybe as high as $4,500. And then I kind of tweaked that as time went by and said, yeah, no more than $4,000. And it came in at $37.99. Or is it $38.99? I'm losing my memory a little bit. But either way, it was a sub $4,000 camera. And the EOS R3, $59.99. They're leaving that $6,400 spot open, that $6,499 spot open, because Canon could very easily have offered the R3 at $6,499, but they couldn't. Not because it wouldn't sell as well, but because up against the Alpha 1, it just didn't look as appetizing. It's not as capable. 6K 60 is the highest frame rate it can do for video. It's a good camera. It's a solid camera, but it's not a flagship camera. For that, it's the R1. And to be a master of everything, that sounds really incredible. Oh, and one last thing too, please don't forget to subscribe and like. It really does help this channel grow, and I take it as a virtual pat on the back. But thank you so much for watching The Ordinary Filmmaker. Just one more thing I want to talk to you about before I end out this video, a little bit of behind the scenes. I've been using this MacBook Air, the 13-inch MacBook Air since it came out. Not since it came out, since March, for my channel. And several times I said it's incredible how fast it is. No drop frames, no sluggishness in any way whatsoever. However, in using Final Cut Pro since the latest version, since they released the M1 Pro and M1X, it has been very, very sluggish in terms of audio. So for example, when I take the video and the audio and I put it into Final Cut and I synchronize, whenever I sort of zoom in, it takes almost as many as 10 seconds before the audio is visible, and I can see that. And that's really important to me when I'm scrubbing. At least now it no longer crashes when I'm rendering, which is really good because in some of my projects I do like to render. Not so much with these videos that I'm producing here, but I've noticed that since they've optimized Final Cut for the M1 Pro and M1 Max, they've de-optimized it for the MacBook or the M1s, and that's really sad because it was so blindingly fast. The only place I noticed that it slowed down was on exporting 8K video. And it's frustrating because I was running with this for many, many months, and it was incredible how fast it was. And I kind of looked at it, and it has 8 gigs of RAM, and I thought, what's the point of getting 16 or 32 or even 64 gigs of RAM if it's able to produce at this level of performance? And I said, as long as you're doing 4K, and it doesn't matter whether it's R5, R3, high bitrate, RAW, this thing can eat it for lunch and ask for more, no problems. The only problem I ever had was exporting 8K, and some video package like MotionVFX, their overlays would become a little sluggish if I had multiple layers. But outside of that, it was super fast. Now I'm finding it to be a little bit sluggish. So if you're doing 4K video, I'll say this, if you're doing it for family videos, you're doing 4K videos every now and then, it's more than fast enough. You know, get the low-end model, but definitely get a larger SSD. Don't go small on the SSDs. You'll get a longer life with a larger SSD. I would recommend a minimum of 512 gigabytes, but really 1 terabyte is probably where you should be. But as far as the GPUs, I got the lowest level GPU and I was perfectly fine. And for everything else you're going to do for your home stuff, this is more than capable. Now, for those of you that do a lot of 4K video, that you do 8K video, you do this for more professional use, or forget professional use, you just do it a lot and your time matters, well then an M1 Pro or an M1 Max matters. And if you're doing an awful lot of 8K video or 6K video, then definitely the M1 Max. Those extra engines really, really help, especially when it comes to exporting 8K. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of feedback on some of the stuff that I review. Also, I want to talk to you about the Colbor CL100. I've been using this since I did my review about 4 months ago. And I love this thing. I put an umbrella in front of it, and it's really just helped smooth out and simplify my lighting. It's a very, very good product. Behind me here, you can see all these multicolored lights. Let me grab this one right here. These are the Ulanzi LED lights. They're around $20 each, or at least they were last year when I checked out the price. I've been using them for quite some time now. I've got 5 of those behind me, and then right behind here, I have a slightly larger one. And these, they work very well. After every shoot, whether it's 15 minutes or 2 hours, I charge them up, and I've been using them every video that you can see I've been using them in, and they keep working. They're very reliable. $20, I highly recommend them. And of course, the tripods I've been using, I started off with some really cheap tripods and ended up going with the Manfrotto 504X with aluminum tripod. That's my main studio camera. And recently for Christmas, I bought the 502AH. And I use that when I'm shooting stuff upstairs. I just did a time-lapse video of my son putting together a puzzle. And it worked terrific. But there's almost a bit of a regret. I'm always, whenever I come to balancing everything, I miss the 504X. I'd rather be using that upstairs and use the 502AH in the studio. But it's that head. It's of the 504X. It's just really, really amazing. It's definitely a heavier unit with the aluminum tripod. It's very, very bulky when you're moving around. That's what I like about the AH. It's a whole lot lighter. That 504X, if you're doing any sort of studio work, highly recommended. They're not cheap, but every Christmas, right after, it's not Black Friday, it's usually Cyber Monday, they go on sale for about $300 off, and they're highly recommended. A few of you pick them up. They're really, really terrific. I can't say enough about them. And as far as shooting and recording, pretty well anytime I'm shooting and recording, I'm using the Angelbird products. So for the Ninja 5, I've got two Angelbird Atom X SSDs. They've got an aluminum or metal casing, and that helps dissipate heat away from the Ninja 5, keeps it a little cooler. And they're also designed for those high sustained recording rates, like 8K over sample 4K that I'm shooting with right now at 470 megabits per second. No problem. They can take this time in and time out. Samsung Evos, they work great. They're great desktop computers, but they're not designed, nor is the competition, for the Ninja 5. And if you are going to use a Samsung for the Ninja 5, then at least get the Pro level. That's what you need to be using. And that's why the Angelbirds cost more, because it's got a more reliable, longer lasting type of cell in it. You're talking about MLC cells, or just, it's designed for that purpose. The Samsung Evo 870, 860, they're designed for your computer, for general purpose use, not for constant sustained recording. And as far as the CF Express cards, I again use Angelbirds. I got the 2 terabyte, I got the 512 gigabyte they just announced, the 160. But I also use Paragear's cards as well. They sent me a couple of their cards. I've got the 512 gig and the recently announced 1 terabyte. I've used both of them. I used the 512 for about 6 months and had no problems. I used the 1 terabyte too. The only thing right now is with Angelbird's 512 gigabyte, you can buy 2 of those for the same price as the Paragear 1 terabyte, yet the Angelbirds have twice the minimum record speed of 800 megabytes per second sustained. So right now, with the same price as the Paragear, the Angelbird offers you a better deal. So you've got the market leader, the innovator that has their own fab, is able to produce a low-cost card, high-quality, low-cost card, and that's really something I'm not used to seeing. If you have any questions about any videos that I've done in the past where I've reviewed something, go ahead and post a question in the comment section. I do constantly check comments. Now, sometimes I do miss them. Sometimes if you've got a question and it doesn't look like I've answered it, go to my latest video, and within a couple of hours after publishing, go ahead and post it in there, and I'll respond to you, because a lot of times, especially during the Christmas break here, I haven't been focusing on the channel a whole lot. You'll notice in the last week or two, yes, there's more videos because there's been more news coming out. But look at Canon rumors. There's been several announcements about new lens formulas, the 135 millimeter and several other primes. But I looked at this and I thought, like, there's nothing here. Great, we've got some formulas, but when are these coming out? No idea. What is the likelihood that these are going to happen? Very low probability. There's no sort of validation there, to the point where, okay, I'm going to relax and enjoy my day rather than put out a video saying, by the way, here are some lens formulas that may or just may not happen. And then I thought about doing a video where I'd look at all the rumored lenses over the last couple of years and give you an update. The problem is, most of them haven't aged well. Most of them are like a CR0 or a CR1, and there hasn't been much in terms of updates, so I'd just be wasting your time. So I decided, you know what, I'm not going to do that. And then I saw some information about the R1. I know the R1's heating up, and I want to bring everything back to give you a summary of the R1 and what it looks like. And that one quote where, let me see again, a jack of all trades and a master of none, except that it will be a master of everything. Very, very bold. And seeing what they've done with the R5, I do believe Canon is capable of bold. The R3, to me, isn't bold. The R3 is just a tool, like a hammer, that does a job very, very well. The R5 is more like a Swiss Army knife. It's got so many different things in there and it's very useful and it's lightweight. I expect the R1 to be significant based on a quote like this. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon. And I probably won't, let's see, what is today now? Is it the 30th? So tomorrow's New Year's Eve. So Happy New Year. I wish all of you a much better year in 2022. May it be better than 2021. And I wish you and your family all the best. That's it for now. We'll see you again soon.